welcome to Memoir Church. It is my happy place on the first Sunday of every month. We've been doing it for over a year now, and I get to have lovely people in the Zoom room with me, like Katherine Berger. Katherine, where are you zooming in from today?
Woodstock, New York.
So, what calls you to writing?
I think we came from a very literary family. My mother always was writing. My father wanted to be a writer, but became a literary agent instead. And it was just something that I saw that people grown-ups did. They were on their typewriters typing away. And when we had books read aloud to us, and it just seemed like telling stories and keeping a journal when I was 14 and to this day. So
Nice. Do you have all your journals? Did you keep
I
them?
do. I do. I don't know when they'll just probably go in the dumpster when I'm
Oh
gone.
my God.
I don't know where to go, but yeah.
Ah, I met you through Roland's Wednesday Gathering, and a plug for Wednesday Gathering. I love it. You get 5 minutes to read, and you can just come when you can. Um, and I I was completely mesmerized by your work and your attention to detail. So, what talk about what you're usually write? What genres do you prefer to write in?
I tried. I have a couple of unfinished novels. I've written poetry, but I had been acting for a while, and I started writing a play, and it just clicked for me. I said I love writing dialogue, and so I'm primarily a playwright.
Mhm. Thank you, Catherine, for giving us your time today. And let's get to your reading.
This is yeah, for putting all this together.
Yay.
This is called Dismantling Otis World. This is the story of how my sister and I cleared out our mother's crowded West Village townhouse after her death so that we could sell the building. Through this experience, I tried to both relinquish the past and most of her possessions and to honor our charming, aggravating, mercurial mother. Otis Kidwell Berger, poet, artist, and author, died in April of 2022, aged 97. We had already sold her rustic cabin in the northwest corner of Connecticut and cleaned out all the clutter that had accumulated there for half a century. Her West Village townhouse had been the repository of family antiques, yard sale treasures, walls of books, and everything that took her fancy for 63 years. Our parents had bought the building, a blue townhouse on Bethune Street, in 1958, when the far West Village was so derelict that they had real concern if it would be a safe place to raise their two daughters, then 7 and 9. The house was built in 1829 as the sole dwelling of a presumably prosperous merchant. From below the ground and moving up the interior staircases, the building consisted of a subterranean basement, a ground floor whose windows were level with the bluestone sidewalk, the parlor floor with 12-foot ceilings, intaglio molding, black marble fireplaces, another floor, then another, then a half floor under slanted ceilings, which may have been storage or a maid's room in the 19th century. The renovations my parents had done included opening up the half floor, creating a loft space overlooking the floor below. For most of my adult life, I rented that top floor and a half from my mother, subletting it out at times. It was a wonderful apartment with wide pine floorboards the color of honey, a brick wall with a working fireplace, a skylight, and high ceilings. The living room looked out on the garden, a riot of greenery anchored by a massive ailanthus tree. When it was fully leafed out, it was like living in a treehouse. Going back down the staircases, there was a floor-through apartment below mine, which was rented out. The bottom 3 floors, the parlor floor, the garden floor, and the basement, were Otis's domain. When our parents bought the building, it had been subdivided into many dwellings. The subfloor and the parlor floor were each separate apartments with their own bathroom and kitchen, and the middle and top floors were divvied up into one-room rentals with a shared bathroom. One renter was family friend Jane Jacobs, who wrote her seminal book on city planning, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and a rented room on the second floor, away from her lively family on nearby Hudson Street. Who lived full-time in these little rooms? Sad, lonely men, I think. My sister and I found evidence of lives left behind: a gray fedora, a collection of white elephants in diminishing sizes. Whatever happened to those tiny plastic pachyderms? If my mother had claimed them, they would still be in the house somewhere, as she never threw anything out. Things checked into the house, but never left. Our father left, though, 7 years after they bought the house. I think the experience of owning a building together exacerbated their profound differences. Knox was social and financially generous. Otis was shy and almost comically parsimonious. Knox liked modern furniture, clean working spaces, and orderly life. He was at times an editor, at the time, an editor at a publishing house. After he left to a new marriage, he also went out on his own as a literary agent. Otis liked antiques, clutter, chaos, drama, a lack of schedule, and cats. He was a writer and an artist and a champion arguer, all of which made her an interesting, combative, and ultimately exhausting spouse. Otis's long life began in Staten Island. She had an almost Victorian childhood there and at her grandmother's magical Asbury Park estate, along with her brother and sister. Otis was the eldest, a fierce little redhead. She recently told Neil that halcyon childhood was the happiest time of her life. I think she did her best to recreate that time of freedom and discovery for us when we were children, filling our lives with art projects, animals, reading, and nature. Yeah. Otis was both an English and zoology major during her peripatetic college career and was full of arcane knowledge on seemingly everything. We spent summers in wild rural areas, free to roam the woods and fields. She read all the great English children's books aloud to us at night. She'd take us to the Metropolitan Museum with sketch pads. We dressed in sheets and became Greek goddesses. She sang Gilbert and Sullivan songs. We had a pet raccoon, along with many cats, cereal dogs, mice, a rabbit, and horses in the summer. And she was always busy with her own creative projects. She had a ceramic studio. She acted in plays at Judson Church. She wrote late into the night on her clacking Royal typewriter and published short stories in science fiction magazines, several books, poetry, some in the New Yorker, and book reviews. I have a memory that she was one of the first people to review William Faulkner. Otis had a privileged childhood. Servants did the cleaning. She had a brilliant, controlling polymath mother who was, among other things, a scientist and a germaphobe. Elizabeth's 3 children had to wear white gloves on trips to the city from their Staten Island abode. I've sometimes speculated that Otis's aversion to housework was rooted in both the subliminal belief that it was not her job and in a feeling that, once past her antiseptic childhood, scoffing at germs was sticking it to the mom. Apparently, children who are raised on a farm are exposed to lots of bacteria, and because of this, stay healthier than children raised in a more antibacterial environment. And maybe one reason that Otis stayed pretty healthy into her 90s was how thoroughly she rejected her mother's dicta. Her environment wasn't just cluttered, but actually dirty. She'd spent teenage summers on a ranch in Wyoming and loved those wide open spaces. But when it came to her homes, I think Otis was genuinely more comfortable in dark, crowded nests than in well-lit spaces with clean surfaces. While Otis was winding down and becoming more and more fractious, she didn't want us to change anything in the house. But in order to accommodate the readers, then helpers, then home care aides, who became her occasional and then full-time companions, my sister and I had to remove some of the clutter against her vociferous objections and make some order of the kitchen. No more sinkfuls of empty, smelly cat food cans waiting until some kind of critical mass was reached to be washed and recycled. No more bits of leftover food cultivating their bacteria gardens in the back of the fridge. It was a 2-year battle to get Otis to put a real garbage bag in the kitchen trash bin and not the small plastic bags from nearby D'Agostino's market, so that the garbage wouldn't spill over and settle into a noxious mess at the bottom of the bin. By the time she died, Otis had been beleaguered with increasingly distressing ailments and was losing vitality, as well as some of the antechambers of her pack rat mind. So it was a blessing in a way that she didn't go on, becoming more and more diminished and uncomfortable. She had stopped going downstairs to her bedroom and held court in the parlor floor with its high-ceilinged living room, dining area, kitchen, and bathroom. She died the night before a hospital bed was to be delivered, a decision that she fought against as hard as she'd fought against replacing the non-working bathtub in the parlor floor bathroom with a shower, against a new coffee maker that actually worked, against a cot to replace the broken down sofa, which had become her bed, which had to be thrown out because of bed bugs. She was devoted to her things. She was at heart an animist. Everything had a soul. And if you threw out a broken cup or a Bic pen with no more ink, it was wounding to her. She grieved for it. Our grandmother Peggy, Knox's mother, had a friend who, unlike Otis, was an organized hoarder. I remember seeing a box in her house labeled "Pieces of String Too Short to Save."
Wow.
And there is a poem waiting in that line. Otis had 2 books of poetry published in her 90s, both of which I illustrated: Cats, Love, and Other Surprises, a collection of mostly recent short poems ranging from the whimsical to the metaphysical. And I'll just read one.
Can you show us the cover again when you get a second? Just for
Here's the cover.
Nice.
And here's Cats, it's Christmas. Come, let's be frisky. You take catnip, I'll take whiskey. And with inebriated glee, we'll scramble around the Christmas tree. So, and she also published, the other book was Love is a Season, a suite of extraordinary, almost Elizabethan love sonnets she'd written in 1957. One of her readers discovered the only extant copy in a desk drawer when Otis was 94. And through a series of serendipitous events, Dr. Cicero Press published it in 2018. Wow. There was an article in the New York Times about Otis, and a photo essay about her papier-mâché sculptures was published in Tether magazine. She attended a weekly poetry group that met at the local Left Bank bookstore. When they closed, I suggested she host them in her parlor, and she did, presiding over these lively events in her red velvet Victorian rocker, a short bow-legged Katherine Hepburn look-alike with a contralto voice, a formidable vocabulary, and an ever-present glass of triple sec. So she had a pretty good last act, surrounded by people who admired her and catered to her. But I know that she felt unfulfilled because a solipsist can never get enough recognition. She craved more fame as a writer and still yearned for a great love affair. Love affairs. Her mother's marriage to her father lasted 18 years. And then she was in a 40-plus year relationship with Ralph, an alcoholic merchant marine who was, shall we say, a challenging person. He did give up booze eventually when he got a heart transplant. Years of hard drinking, smoking, and contentious behavior took its toll, and a new heart couldn't save him from lung cancer. And now his ashes sat in an urn on the mantle in the parlor. Otis willfully forgot all of his violence and belligerence. She only wanted to remember how handy he was at fixing things and how much he loved the animals. Although on one occasion, when he came home drunk, he only remembered in the morning that he'd left the dog in a bar. Vanessa, the dog, seemed to forgive him, but my sister and I had a harder time coping with this scary man. Otis also glossed over the fact that Ralph kept her socially isolated. It was just the 2 of them and the animals. After he died, her social life blossomed. In her 90s, Otis met Runar on a snowy night in the West Village. He offered to help her with her shopping cart, and they became friends and more. He was Danish, bisexual, and brash. She adored him. And I know he cared for her as well, but not as much as she wanted him to. Apparently, a few days before she died, she asked him to marry her. That didn't happen, thank God. She was 97. He was in his 50s, younger than me. I suppose if it wasn't my own mother, I might be impressed that a woman her age could charm a man half her age, but I couldn't quite make that leap. Otis died on April 20th, 2021. My sister and I got a call from Anne, one of her stalwart companions, that she wasn't doing well. And we drove like hell the 2 hours from our upstate homes, but she was gone by the time we got there. She lay on the cot with folded hands. Her face looked astonishingly young. I stayed with her body that night, reading some of her poetry aloud to her. A few months prior, I had managed to have a conversation with Otis about her burial wishes. There's a family plot on Staten Island, but I told Otis it was unlikely they would ever visit her there. I don't want to spend eternity next to my mother anyway, she said. So I bought a plot in the Woodstock Artist Cemetery. She loved Woodstock. She used to visit me here. She opted for a green burial, so the next few days were a blur as we had to get my mother's corpse into the ground as soon as possible. We cobbled together a gathering of friends and a nice ceremony with music, poetry, and food. We toasted Otis's memory with triple sec, her nightly tipple, and put a full bottle into the grave next to her plain pine coffin. Later, there was a poetry memorial for her and a memorial at Westbeth, but once she was in the ground, the great dismantling had to begin. This is a longer piece. I'm just reading sections, and I go into granular detail about all her stuff and how I disposed of it, and all the people who helped her readers, these two sympathetic antique dealers, Tom and Jeff, the indispensable Vinny and Juan, who helped Juan Fernando Lamadrid, who Chilean, who helped us with all the cleaning and the movie stuff, but we're not going to read that now because we have a time frame. So I'm going to leap ahead to, in a back corner of the basement, I found a falling apart crate, and in a nest of yellowed, crumbling newspapers from the 1960s was a cache of delicate etched drinking glasses and a stack of deep dish ironstone plates. I imagined Otis bringing them home from some summer of antiquing, squirreling them away, and never thinking about them again. The thrill of the hunt was the point, and the hoarding, mine, all mine. I admit that I share some of that attachment to things. As a child and young teenager, I used to enjoy hours spent with Otis deep diving into antique stores while Neil fumed in the car. Sorry about that, Neil. I'm so sorry. But I've been learning to let go, and dealing with my mother's overabundance of things has hastened that release. I did keep the glasses and the plates, however, as I knew I would use them. There were 3 tall metal filing cabinets, and I was determined to go through whatever was in them, although one had to be opened with a crowbar. One contained records of our parents' life together, which no longer needed to be saved. Old tax returns and bank books, deeds from a failed real estate venture near Lake Champlain of my grandmother Elizabeth's. But the others were full of Otis's writings. She was an obsessive writer. Her spidery writing scrawled on envelopes, on scraps of paper, in notebooks. I found a whole typed novel I didn't know about. And there were letters. I spent hours in the Stygian dark of the basement, perched on a box, poring over them, reacquainting myself with our parents' witty literary friends who were so much a part of our childhood. In that pre-email time, everyone wrote letters, and wonderful ones at that. I found some letters to Otis from Kurt Vonnegut. He was at Cornell with our father, who got Kurt's early work published. Kurt dedicated one of his books, Welcome to the Monkey House, to Knox, and used 27 Bethune Street as the hapless protagonist's apartment in Mother Night. In Kurt's collected letters, published as a book in 2012, Kurt describes to his wife Jane a derelict, untidy apartment that was provided to him at one of his college teaching gigs. And he wrote, "It looks as if Otis Berger has been here before me." There was also an exchange between my mother and Anais Nin. Otis had been an early reviewer of the famous diaries, and Nin praised her acumen that she got the book as other reviewers had not.
Wow.
And there were many letters between our parents. At the end of her life, Otis sometimes said, "I wish I could just talk to your father and ask him what happened. I thought we were so good together." In In some ways, they were good together. Two extremely attractive young people from similar backgrounds, New England antecedents going back to the Mayflower on both sides, who shared a love of writing, language, nature, fly fishing. Knox once told me that it was fun being married to Otis at first, but his letters chronicled our father's increasing frustration with Otis's stubbornness, her redheaded anger, her willful scorn of housekeeping. His clothing's evolved from love to your fond husband to just Knox. I think he did his best to tell her why he felt they weren't that good together anymore, but she couldn't hear it. And he was not easy either, but that's a whole other story. So I'm going to leap ahead some more sections where I talk about her ceramics and her artwork and the continued cleaning out and getting rid of things. And anyway, as its furnishings were stripped away layer by layer, the house revealed its past. The walls showed the rectilinear shapes of now missing pictures and furniture, like dingy shadows. One uncovered a line of gold leaf running under the intaglio molding, which encircled the ceiling, which someone had painted over. You probably have $1,000 worth of gold in this room, Juan said. I don't know. Anyway. As part of readying the space for painting, Juan took down a large built-in closet in the parlor floor, its tall, narrow doors made of Brazilian mahogany. And the back wall was revealed, perhaps for the first time since 1829, papered in Victorian cabbage rose wallpaper. Otis would have loved this poignant pentimento from the past, but it got scraped away and everything was painted white. The dark Turkish red entranceway walls, gone. The pale apple green bathroom, gone. From a cluttered nest where the floors and walls were almost completely obscured by rugs, pictures, furniture, bits and bobs, the house emerged with its bones showing stark white and almost Arctic purity and calm. I recently heard a story on the Moth radio show told by a violinist whose priceless Stradivarius was stolen. He got it back and had the epiphany that his ownership of this glorious instrument was just an episode in its already long and colorful life. So too, our family's stay in this venerable building was just a chapter in its history. Although for over 60 years, it seemed that this would always be our family home. I walked through the emptying, echoing white space, overcome with memories of the life, the many people and pets who had passed through these rooms. When I was 14, my best friend Linda and I threw a winter solstice party at the house. It became a yearly tradition for the next 6 decades, the rooms crammed with revelers. Otis would cook the best turkey in the world. Everyone would decorate the tree, sing Christmas carols, and wallow in an almost Dickensian glow of Christmas past and good fellowship. After the singing of carols, and sometimes the Messiah, my friend Stan, a concert pianist and Bernard Herrmann aficionado, would play the themes of Vertigo and Psycho. It's a Christmas tradition with us. One regular guest told me it was the only party he needed. But it got to be too much for me to clean up the apartment for this once-a-year event, which is also the one time in the year when the apartment did get cleaned. So that stopped. But then in her 90s, Otis began hosting the poetry salons, and we had birthday parties for her, which were also pretty lively events. Her friend Nicholas made her a poetic license plate when she turned 94 and renewed at 95. And you can show that picture now, Roland, of her.
Poetic license, Otis.
Yes, state of mind.
Poetic license.
There she is, 94, about to cut the cake. There's the. Okay, so now I need to get back to. Okay, let's see. I have to find my. There we go. I'm back.
That's priceless.
Yeah. Anyway, so when she turned 94 to be renewed at 90, and it was renewed again at 95. I had hoped that there would be a real blowout party in 3 years when she turned 100. She said she was aiming for that, and as she almost always got her way, it was a surprise when she died short of that goal. We'd found a home for Otis's 2 cats, and I'm thanking Liz, who's out there. She's still there. But the urn with Ralph's ashes still sat on the living room mantle. His nephew had sprinkled some of Ralph's ashes in the ocean, befitting a merchant marine, but didn't want the rest of them. Ralph was too difficult a person to want to share space with, even dead. Even Otis, who glossed over the unpleasantness of Ralph's drinking decades as if it had never happened, had made it quite clear that she didn't want him in the grave with her. So I made a phone call on a beautiful autumn day, drove to my mother's cabin in the Connecticut woods, and the very nice couple who bought it helped me dig a hole in the cat cemetery, repository of generations of beloved pets, some of whom were kept in the Bethune Street freezer until warmer weather allowed their internment in the woods. Ralph, more comfortable with animals than with people, had doted on the cats. I hope he will be at peace in your eternal company.
Oh.
I've had several vivid dreams of Otis since her death, and although each one has been different, the scenario is the same. Otis is about to come back to the house from some sojourn away, and I am panicked because she will find that all of her stuff is gone. She was devoted to her stuff and upset if anything was changed. She was incandescent with rage when I replaced her coffee making system, a sooty kettle that left her hands black with its melted rubber handle that got sticky when hot. Her drip system, a takeout plastic tub with a slit in the bottom and paper towels as the filters. And I replaced this with an electric tea kettle and a ceramic cone. Even though other people were the ones making her coffee now, she never wanted anything to change. You know, I've caught a few minutes of hoarding as I clicked the TV remote late at night. Otis was somewhere on that spectrum when things become more important than people. I, too, have an affinity for finding and holding onto treasures, possibly kindled during a childhood of hanging out in antique stores. During my pre-adolescence, I collected antique dolls and all kinds of doll ephemera, little tea sets and furniture, a tiny hairbrush, a tiny telescope. But I sold most of them a few years ago while Otis wailed, "Katherine, how could you, Katherine?" I have weaned myself almost from yard sales. I did save some of my mother's treasures from the Great Purge. I tried only keeping things that I liked and would use. Our great-grandmother's oak sewing table with its turned spiral legs, metal claw feet clutching glass balls, its three drawers full of vintage sewing paraphernalia, the etched drinking glasses, one embroidered pillow, some pieces of silver, Otis's baby cup, a porridge spoon that I used to measure out my coffee, a toy horse on a wheeled platform, some beautiful china, a stained glass panel that I had incorporated into our attic renovation. It's behind me now. But I don't live a Victorian life. Well, neither did Otis, but she wanted to hold on to the world of her grandmother. I don't need an ironstone vegetable tureen or a fluted silver bowl that held a clutch of fancy Christmas bulbs year-round in the entrance hall, surrounded by rising piles of junk mail. I don't need an armada of little wooden chairs or a collection of easily bent coin silver fiddleback spoons. So I said goodbye to most of my mother's stuff and to the house and also to the world of our parents, a world that I am sometimes more nostalgic for than my own coming of age time. The publishing world friends, the cocktail parties. I have a memory of Otis jitterbugging with Kurt Vonnegut. Otis's stiletto heels and cowboy hats, a lifelong homage to her teenage summers in Wyoming. The New Yorker magazine covers on the bathroom wall, the Updike and Cheever stories in its pages chronicling familiar territory. My father's jazz records, his Lenny Bruce records, he knew Bruce slightly. The summer exodus to various rural country retreats, summers of trout streams, books read by the soft light of kerosene lamps, our parents' friends drinking gin and tonics and telling stories into the night as moths beat their dusty wings against the window panes trying to get in. And goodbye to my younger selves. I came of age in the 60s in the West Village. I painted my bedroom dark purple. I wore miniskirts and dresses with Indian embroidery, my long hair parted down the middle. Our parents split up when I was a high school freshman, and there wasn't a lot of parental oversight. I'd walk across the village to McDougal Street every Saturday night to join the scrum of other restless young people. I'd meet up with friends or encounter new people, end up at parties and ad hoc be-ins, discovering boys, weed, and rock and roll. And goodbye to the apartment I lived in for most of my adult life, the friends and boyfriends who passed through, the years of working temp jobs during the day and performing as a singer and actor at night, or later of working backstage at the Metropolitan Opera as the child wrangler, coming back after 12-hour days to my wonderful refuge of an apartment. There was a lot of cachet in having a cool townhouse in the West Village. Being a West Village kid was central to my identity, and now I was giving that up too. I know that Otis always thought that her family would live forever at 27 Bethune Street, but things change. My sister and I both live in the Hudson Valley. My nieces live in California. Otis's possessions mostly found new homes, and the building has new stewards. The process of dismantling Otis World was exhausting, cathartic, and instructive. During this extended operation, we were gratified by all the help we received from Otis's fans, and we met interesting new people. I regret that Otis didn't get to meet Tom and Jeff, the antique guys, and Vinny and Juan. She loved men, and she would have been charmed by these chaps, one of her many Anglicisms. I'm sorry that I didn't get to share some of Knox's old letters with her to see what her take would have been 60 years later. I'm even kind of sorry that she didn't get to see the building after it was restored to its pristine, empty self. I wonder if it would have reminded her of when we moved in 1958, and the blue townhouse on Bethune Street was a tabula rasa, waiting for the unfolding of the life that would fill it for decades to come.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Oh, beautiful.